Clerics and multiclassing. What are the best practices to make an effective character by dipping into Cleric or dipping into another class from Cleric? And what are some fun concepts that you can take to your game? Today on Flutes Loot. I have an article accompanying this video, and there's a link to that in the description below. I've got all my notes there, and I go over way more material than I will in this video. Clerics are one of the big three for multiclassing: Clerics, Warlocks, and Sorcerers, because they all get a subclass at level 1. Clerics are interesting because many of the subclasses as a subclass feature get heavy armor at level 1 as well. So usually multiclassing with Cleric would only get you medium, light armor, and shields. But if your subclass specifically says you gain heavy armor at level 1, then you'll also be proficient with heavy armor. Recently, some of the most common multiclass concepts for Cleric involve the Twilight Cleric and the Peace Cleric, because they get so much at level 1 that is often much stronger than what other clerics can give at that level. In addition to the subclass features, there's the base Cleric features of spellcasting that can be very valuable. You gain all the Cleric spells, you don't have to learn them, you just prepare them, so you can pick and choose the best ones, of which I have an article about which of the Cleric spells are the best to prepare for each level. I recommend checking that out too. The Life Cleric is another notable one because of its heavy armor and its ability to synergize with Good Berry, enhancing each berry to be like 4 times as much healing. If you go for 2 levels of Cleric, you get their Channel Divinities. The Twilight Cleric, again, comes out on top with a very powerful Channel Divinity to give temporary hit points to your team each round, in addition to Twilight's level 1 abilities of initiative bonuses and super dark vision, martial weapons, heavy armor. Wow. When a primary Cleric wants to multiclass, it's often so it can gain more armor if it doesn't have heavy armor, Divine Smites from 2 levels of Paladin, Action Surge from Fighter, plus a fighting style, Rogue to gain a bonus action at level 2 for cunning action, or perhaps Druid levels to gain spells like Conjure Animals if it wants to invest a lot in that other class. But overall, I'd say the Cleric class is one of the most straightforward classes if you want to just go all the way to level 20 as a Cleric. There are some optimization opportunities out there, such as to make your saving throws better, make your initiative better, gain spells like Absorb Elements, Silvery Barbs, and Shield for your reactions. So there's always room to improve. Common choices are to go 1 level of Sorcerer, Divine Soul, so that you can get Favored of the Gods and get 2d4 to a saving throw when you're struggling. You could go for a level of Hexblade Warlock if you just want to have access to the Shield spell, because that's on that Warlock subclass's spell list to choose from. And you could go 2 levels of it if you want to get Invocations. In fact, you could even be a Cleric who focuses very little on investing in Wisdom and maybe boost its Charisma, so it can be an Eldritch Blaster with the invocation Agonizing Blast while just blessing its allies. You can get away with this because a lot of Cleric spells don't rely on having a high Wisdom score. Bless is certainly one of them because your Wisdom modifier doesn't come up at all in that spell. You just add a d4 to your allies. But most people will want to invest in Wisdom when they play a Cleric, so let's start looking at some subclass specific concepts beyond the usual optimization choices and see what we can find. And remember, sometimes you can achieve something that you need from multiclassing for a feat, but not always. I'm going to go through each Cleric subclass now in alphabetical order and let you know 1 or 2 of my favorite picks from my article for multiclassing concepts involving that subclass. Up first is the Arcana Domain. I think this would be an excellent 1-level dip for a Thief Rogue. The Thief Rogue has the Fast Hands ability, allowing it to use the Use an Object action as a bonus action. This can include taking a vial of oil and splashing it on an enemy as your bonus action. It counts as an improvised attack, so you can deal damage with the attack itself. Then they're doused in oil. Now, when you deal fire damage, it will do +5 damage because that's how oil works in the player's handbook. With the Arcana Cleric 1 level, you can learn a wizard cantrip called Green Flame Blade. Now you can reliably do fire damage after you douse someone in oil. So you can do an improvised attack, deal some damage that way, and then while they're covered in oil, you deal +5 from the oil, you deal your sneak attack damage, assuming that it applies with a rapier or whatever you're attacking with, as your Green Flame Blade also deals fire damage to it. This more comes into effect at level 5 when the Green Flame Blade doesn't just affect someone adjacent. But until then, you could douse someone in oil next to your target, and then Green Flame Blade sneak attack your main target while dealing fire damage to the stooge on the right. Plus, you'll gain medium armor proficiency and shield proficiency, so you can have a shield and wield your rapier, or you can keep your hands free so you can use your fast hands to do the tomfoolery that I just described. And you get those 1st level Cleric spells. Next is the Death Domain. My personal favorite concept is to go Death Cleric 18 levels and Necromancy Wizard 2 levels. With 2 Necromancer Wizard levels, you gain Grim Harvest. It allows you to gain a lot of extra hit points when you slay a creature. I would like to make a Vampiric Touch focused Necromancer, and the Death Cleric, Necromancer, Wizard can accomplish this for me. The Death Cleric can put necrotic damage boosting onto melee attacks, and it can twin cast Necromancy cantrips if it wants to do Toll the Dead on adjacent enemies. And later it can twin cast higher level Necromancy spells other than cantrips. But I mostly just want to do Vampiric Touch and reap people's souls. Your soul is mine. When not using Vampiric Touch, you can use your martial weapons you've gained from Death Cleric, and you can attack with Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade if you learn that from the Wizard levels. You'll have multiple fighting styles based on if you need to keep your distance or if you want to get in close and wail on an enemy. Your spell slot progression won't be hindered because you're doing 2 full spell casting classes. There's a lot you can do with it. I would just personally focus on Vampiric Touch because I enjoy being a life-draining character concept. Let's move on to the Forge Domain next. My favorite concept that I came up for the Forge Domain is to do Forge Cleric 6 levels and Transmutation Wizard 14 levels. The Transmutation levels will make you excellent at using the Fabricate spell so that you can instantly create things. And the Forge Domain gives you all the smithing tools that you need and a Channel Divinity so you can essentially do something similar to Fabricate and create something on the spot. You're a master craftsman who can transmute materials to make what they need, kind of like in Full Metal Alchemist where they transmute what's around them into new objects and tools. You also gain a few options for elemental damage resistances from the Forge Domain's Fire Resistance and the Transmutation Wizard's Transmuter Stone. The Grave Domain is next. One of the first articles I ever wrote on FlutesLoot.com was for a Grave Cleric 2 and an Assassin Rogue 18. I just love the idea of taking a Grave Cleric's Channel Divinity, Path to the Grave, and cursing someone before you lay an ambush. So the Assassin Rogue can auto-crit someone who is surprised if they hit them, and then at later levels they get Death Strike, level 17. Death Strike makes an enemy do a Constitution saving throw, or they take double damage from your attack. So you're doing sneak attack damage, auto-crit, vulnerable damage, and then double damage. And the vulnerable damage stacks with the double damage because vulnerability doesn't usually stack with itself, but this effect doesn't say it makes him vulnerable, it just says double the damage. So you're doing 4 times as much damage on a sneak attack crit. But even before 20th level, 2 levels of Grave Cleric is going to help you because you'll get the medium armor, the shield, the cleric spells, and the Grave Cleric's useful abilities to help your allies who are downed. And by the way, I did revise the Assassin Rogue with some new abilities which I think make the subclass much more substantial, so go check that out if you're interested in a new type of Assassin Rogue. The next Cleric Domain is Knowledge. I think this fits really well with the Divination Wizard. The Knowledge Cleric downloads information and skill sets from their gods, and then the Divination Wizard's Portent ability will give it visions to foresee things in the coming adventuring day so that you can manipulate some rolls and have some fun with that. People really enjoy Portent, even if I think it gets overrated by the majority of the D&D community discourse online. It's still a very good ability. And if you're interested in that topic, I have a video about that Portent ability specifically. The Knowledge Cleric Divination Wizard combination is actually one I used for a limited couple of one-shots, and I thought it was a really fun concept. The Life Domain Cleric is a popular one because it's very straightforward and it just allows you to heal more, which a lot of people who play Cleric do enjoy doing. I like being a support character, so when I play Cleric, the Life Cleric was one of my favorite characters that I played. One fun combination that I came up with recently is 1 level of Life Cleric and 19 of Alchemist Artificer, because both of those subclasses have abilities that boost the healing of spells, and so you can double down and get a pretty decent bonus to your healing spells. Imagine rolling a healing word spell that would normally heal for 1, but you give it a +8, so a roll of 1 got you 9 points of healing. I also like the idea of an Eloquence Bard, which is a very powerful Bard archetype, and giving it 1 level of Life Cleric to help it with its healing and give it heavy armor and cleric spells. Honorable mention to going Life Cleric 17 and Circle of the Shepherd Druid 3, because anytime you go with Druid with a Life Cleric, you get the super good berries that heal extra. In fact, if you're playing a Gloomstalker Ranger, 1 level of Life Cleric is great for your good berry enhancement, in addition to you being a very powerful martial character. Next is the Light Domain Cleric, and I have 2 concepts that aren't very optimal, but I think they're cool themes that can fit together. One is Light Cleric 13 and Sun Soul Monk level 7. You're playing into the light and the sunlight theme. You're a cleric first with your light abilities that give you Burning Hands and some other fire type abilities like Fireball, but then you also have these Sun Soul Monk abilities for if you don't want to use your spell slots, you want to use some ki instead and do some martial arts or some light beams. The other concept is if you want to combine Light Cleric with Illusionist Wizard, mostly Illusionist 15 levels and Light Cleric 5, and I like this because illusions are just light playing tricks on you. That's how Mysterio does many of his illusions in Spider-Man. You could flavor your illusions that you cast as a wizard as just you manipulating light, and your Light Domain is feeding into that. You blind people when they try to attack you, and you mislead people with illusions. For the Nature Domain Cleric, I'd like to combine it with the Ranger, specifically the Beastmaster. Let's go 11 levels of that, and then 9 levels of Nature Cleric. Nature Cleric, level 6, will allow you to dampen elemental damage to protect you, your allies, including your beast, from instances of elemental damage. So if you don't all get hit by a fireball, then you can guard someone from one instance, or in that fireball, if you all get hit, you can help one person to resist it. And eventually you'll have Conjure Animals, and with your Cleric levels, your spell slot progression will be enhanced so you can upcast Conjure Animals. You'll also have options if you're doing more melee based to do Spirit Guardians. You can use Spiritual Weapon if you're into using that. You could even pick up Shillelagh. For the Order Domain Cleric, I really like Treant Monk's concept of the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer 19 levels and the Order Domain Cleric 1. The Clockwork Soul Sorcerer is a very strong sorcerer with varied spells and more spells than the usual sorcerer, with some useful abilities to support its allies, and the Order Cleric will allow it to do things like Healing Word somebody and allow them to attack as a reaction to enhance the DPR of your team overall. For the Peace Domain, I already mentioned that it's one of the most talked about new subclasses from Tasha's. I guess it's not new anymore. I won't go into all the level 1 dips that are possible with it, but I will go into a actual concept where you could be mostly a Peace Cleric. 17 levels, and an Alchemist Artificer 3 levels. The Alchemist can brew potions that allow an ally to add a d4 to its attacks and saves and such. Then you can cast Bless with your Cleric levels for d4, and then your Peace Cleric can use Emboldening Bond for another d4. So one of your allies can get an extra d4, and a few can get 2d4, and you can make everything very likely to succeed in combat when you're rolling 3d4 extra to your attacks and saves. It's super gimmicky, and it just completely zeroes in on these d4s that you can add to your allies, but I think it's humorous, but also effective. For the Tempest Domain, there's some fun stuff you can do with Evocation Wizard and Tempest Cleric to max out your lightning damage, or you could go Order of the Scribes and Tempest Cleric to max out damage from like a fireball as if it was lightning damage. But my favorite Tempest multiclass I've seen actually comes from D4, previously known as D&D Optimized, now called the D4 Network. Colby had this concept where he said the Tempest Cleric, you can do the 2 levels for Channel Divinity, and then Storm Sorcerer level 18. And part of the gimmick was to use Chromatic Orb with Elven Accuracy to maximize your chances of critting on it, and then when you do crit, use Tempest Cleric's Channel Divinity to max the damage of it as lightning damage. I actually don't remember what the level breakdown was in that video, but I tend to assume 2 levels of Tempest Cleric and then 18 of the Storm Sorcerer was probably what the build was. Correct me if I'm wrong. Crit fishing with Chromatic Orb, Elven Accuracy, and maxing it out. That's very inventive. Trickery Domain is next. Wow, Clerics have a lot of domains. I think taking 1 or 3 levels of Trickery Cleric with 17 to 19 levels of Illusionist Wizard could be a lot of fun. The Trickery Domain has advantage on stealth checks, you get the medium armor and shields, and your Channel Divinity to invoke Duplicity. It requires concentration, but you can still have some fun with it. Let's talk about multiclassing with the Twilight Cleric. I'm not going to say every single concept where 1 level dip of Twilight Cleric could be used, because there are so many. It's so much value and the right kind of value for optimization builds. Some of my favorite concepts for the Twilight Cleric include Scout Rogue, 14 to 19 levels, and then Twilight Cleric 1 to 6 levels. You gain the spells, and you can also get Flight at level 6 as a Twilight Cleric. Scout Rogue can have martial weapons, so it can use a longbow, and it gets super dark vision, so it can snipe people from 300 feet away, and get advantage on initiative, so when it sets up ambushes, it's likely to go first, and wow, that's amazing. If not the Scout Rogue, you could go Assassin, so that you can do assassinations from far away. We had this combination of a Twilight Cleric and an Assassin Rogue in my party for Rime of the Frost Maiden, and it was great to give that Assassin long distance dark vision, so that we could do sniping from the distance. An optimization build I saw that was very well thought out and effective, I think it was on Tabletop Builds, their website, and it's for Fey Wanderer Ranger, 16 levels, Divine Soul Sorcerer 1, Divine Favor Saving Throw buff, Twilight Cleric for all the Twilight Cleric things you get, and Undead Warlock 2. And between all those things, you could do well in initiative, all weapons and armor available to you, your saving throws are boosted, you can make enemies afraid, and you can chain fear them with your Fey Wanderer's abilities to take charms and fear effects and like reuse them as a reaction. Very cool build. I highly recommend checking it out. And of course, Conjure Animals is a big part of that because you're a ranger, and you also have some levels of full spellcaster levels so that your spell slots are great for upcasting. Last but not least is the War Cleric. One of my favorite concepts for this is to do 1 level of War Cleric and 19 levels of Inquisitive Rogue. The Inquisitive Rogue doesn't rely as much as being sneaky, so if you wanted to use heavy armor, you certainly could. If you miss and you don't want to lose out on getting your sneak attack, you can use your War Cleric's ability, Wisdom, a number of times per day to do a bonus action attack, and try again. You can bless your allies to help in a support role. You're investing in wisdom enough to make it easy to multi-class with Cleric, since you already want to be good at insight and those sorts of things to use the Inquisitive Rogue's abilities. The War Cleric could also do well to take 2 levels of Paladin, and you could just focus on being a War Cleric. I've played a War Cleric and had a lot of fun with it. I was usually sword and shield, but sometimes I'd have a great weapon. I thought about going for Great Weapon Master, but I ended up being more of a support role due to my party composition, and I didn't end up taking the Paladin level so I could Divine Smite because I was more support role. But if I needed to be more of a tanky damage dealer martial type, I certainly could have taken 2 levels of Paladin so that I could smite with my Cleric spell slots. I might even go to level 7 or 6 as a Paladin so that I can get auras and a subclass at level 3. So that's a taste of some character concepts I came up with in my article, but for the sake of brevity, I just went over some of my favorites that I thought were inventive or super optimal. And we've now reviewed the best practices for Cleric multiclassing and learned they're really good for multiclassing at level 1, especially some of the subclasses that get so much for 1 level investment. Clerics have great level 1 spells, and they're a class that can really hold their own even if you don't multiclass. It feels good to have freedom with a Cleric, to feel like you can't really get it wrong. Which concepts do you think I should include, or what best practices do you think I overlooked? Bless the like and subscribe buttons below so that you can see us in future videos. Have a blessed weekend of adventuring, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.